Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking something that's literally all around us, the hidden, persistent reality of legacy lead in our physical environment. It's a massive topic that bridges the very walls we live inside to the actual soil where we grow our food. You can't see it, right? It's an invisible legacy, but as you'll see in a few minutes, how we measure and manage it completely dictates our health. To kick things off, let's look at a massive turning point in public health history. I want you to think for a second, what specific year forever changed how we approach the safety of American homes? Getting this right establishes the baseline for literally everything we're going to talk about today when it comes to our indoor environments. Okay, here it is, 1978. That's the year lead paint was officially phased out and banned in the US. So if a professional walks into a house built before 1978, they legally have to assume it contains lead paint. This one single year is the absolutely crucial baseline for all modern home testing and mitigation. Everything, and I mean everything, we understand about managing indoor lead starts right here with this date. All right, moving on to Section 1, testing inside the home. So, inside a pre-1978 house, this toxic legacy is a serious threat, especially to the brain development of young children if it's inhaled or ingested. The stakes here are incredibly high. Now, as demonstrated on the show Ask This Old House, professionals basically have two main ways to test for it. First up, you've got the fast result swab. It's a chemical test. You crush a little tube to mix a liquid on a powder. But to actually use it effectively, you have to literally cut a deep angle through all the layers of paint down to the bare wood, which permanently damages your trim. And worse, it only gives you a basic binary result, yes or no. Then, on the flip side, you have the XRF machine. This thing uses X-rays, it causes absolutely zero damage to the surface, and gives you a vastly more detailed picture. And what makes the XRF machine such a real game changer is that it gives us an exact, safe measurement of the lead concentration, reading straight through decades of paint layers. No scraping windowsills, no ruining your gorgeous historic molding. And why does that matter? Well, getting an exact concentration number, instead of just a generic yes or no, might reveal that the lead levels are actually low enough that you don't need to trigger those extreme, super expensive mitigation protocols. So it's precise, damage-free tracking that ultimately saves homeowners a tremendous amount of money and a lot of unnecessary headaches. Let's transition to Section 2, the threat in urban soil. Okay, let's zoom out. We're going from the exactness of testing our living room windowsills to the much messier reality of the dirt right outside our front doors. Listen to this quote from a recent GeoHealth study. Quote, "Urban soils continue to be the global reservoir for lead. They bear the persistent legacy of leaded gasoline." End quote. I mean, that perfectly captures the tension we're facing right now. On one hand, urban agriculture is absolutely booming, bringing healthy food, green spaces, and community back to our cities, which is amazing. But on the other hand, this agriculture is expanding directly on top of a highly persistent, toxic legacy of leaded gas and past industrial practices. And growing food in cities obviously involves extensive hands-on contact with this exact soil. So here's the crucial point. 400 parts per million, or ppm, is the EPA's residential soil screening level. But get this, it was established way back in 1994. And here's the catch. It was never intended to be a safe baseline for intensive, community-based gardening. Not at all. It was originally just a threshold meant to trigger further risk evaluation for residential sites, assuming casual yard use, like mowing the lawn or playing catch. It simply does not account for someone out there gardening 5 days a week, pulling weeds, harvesting root vegetables, with their hands deep in the dirt for hours at a time. The whole exposure model completely shifted, but the safety number just stayed the exact same. Which brings us to Section 3, the policy patchwork. Because we don't have updated federal guidelines specifically designed for urban agriculture, cities have been left to figure this out entirely on their own. And honestly, it's resulted in a massive systemic problem. To really understand this patchwork, researchers reviewed 43 urban agriculture policies across the 40 most populous cities in the US. They were looking specifically at soil safety policies, the crucial rules meant to actually protect urban growers from these hidden contaminants. And let me tell you, the findings from this review are pretty jarring. Astonishingly, nearly half of these major cities, 18 out of the top 40, don't even have a specific soil safety policy on the books when it comes to urban agriculture. Think about that for a second. In almost half of our largest urban centers, there's just an enormous gap in public health protection for everyday urban growers who might be interacting directly with legacy lead on a daily basis. No way, right? But what about the 22 cities that actually do have policies? Well, welcome to the Wild West. Just look at the staggering variance in what these cities consider a quote-unquote safe amount of lead. These guidance values range chaotically from a highly strict 34 parts per million, all the way up to over 1,200 parts per million. There is simply no common authoritative baseline they're working from. It is literally an absolute free-for-all. Let's look at how this plays out in the real world. In Atlanta, Georgia, if your soil has lead over 340 parts per million, the city just casually recommends using raised beds to limit your contact with the native soil. But if you were to pack up that exact same soil in a truck and move it to Indianapolis, Indiana, gardening as a primary use is outright prohibited. It's kind of absurd. Depending entirely on your zip code, the exact same threat level triggers vastly different legal realities and safety restrictions. So let's look at solutions in Section 4, a roadmap for safety. With such a fragmented and confusing system currently in place, how do we actually fix this and properly protect citizens who just want to grow their own food safely? Well, the researchers recommend 3 core public health functions to unify our approach across the country. Number 1 is assessment. The EPA needs to officially update their exposure factors to account for actual modern urban farming behaviors rather than just casual yard use. Number 2 is policy development. Cities then have to use those updated federal guidelines to create comprehensive, localized soil safety rules that offer real, evidence-based actions for growers. And number 3 is assurance. Cities need to make these rules clear, accessible, and enforceable. We have to strip away the dense technical jargon so every demographic of urban grower can actually understand and implement these safety measures. When you step back and look at the whole picture, the contrast is just incredible. We measure the indoors with precision, but we leave the outdoors to guesswork. It's absolutely striking that we possess advanced XRF machines to perfectly read the chemical makeup of our painted walls down to the exact decimal. Yet our local soil safety relies on this completely unpredictable patchwork of outdated guidelines and geographical luck. So, I'll leave you with this final, provocative thought to chew on today. As urban gardening booms and becomes a true staple of our modern cityscapes, are our local communities really doing enough to protect the food we grow right in our own backyards? Is your city actually equipped to keep your harvest safe? Thank you so much for checking out this explainer, and I highly encourage you to look up your own local soil testing resources.